Good evening, everyone. I believe we are now live. Welcome to TRH, the Reconnection Hour by Mr. Perfect. I am Terry, founder and CEO of Mr. Perfect. What is Mr. Perfect? Most of you know it is a grassroots charity that brings men together at barbecues in local parks across Australia to create community and connection. However, we are more than a barbecue. Online, we provide support, information, and resources for the good of men's health. What is TRH, the Reconnection Hour? Well, we chat to normally health professionals and other people doing incredible things in the world of connection and men's health. Disclaimers, triggers. There normally isn't anything too gory we talk about, and I would probably warn you if there was. Tonight's going to be a good one. There's going to be a lot of things discussed about connection that I probably know nothing about, which is amazing. But yeah, just be wary. We may mention mental health in some format. How has our week been in the world of Mr. Perfect? Well, we've had a bit of a media blitz. I've got a great guy who's our Ken's barbecue host, Phil. He also is a journalist and used to work for a few media outlets. And he's been doing a far better job than I've been doing in getting our name into regional papers, on radio, local radio, which has been a lesson for me, which has been amazing, to basically get the word out there to local communities. And it seems to be working. I've got a lot of inquiries this week about when we're going to start new barbecues in a lot of rural and regional areas, which is all we can ask for. We want to grow more than the 35 barbecues we've got right now. So away we go. It is International Men's Day today. I don't really know much about the day. All I know is that I was reminded that it is, and I don't usually promote stuff like that, be it on my personal stuff or Mr. Perfect. Not for any specific reason. I just don't promote them too heavily. I think the topics we talk about and the things we do are important every day. But it needed at least a nod today that there are people, male and female, that heavily support what we do. And our guest tonight is definitely one of those people. So tonight on Mr. Perfect's TRH, we chat with Dr. Kassi Klein. So Kassi is a medical doctor. She works in mental health. She's also a lifestyle medicine physician, relationship coach for men, and a passionate men's mental health advocate. She's also written 2 superb blogs for us so far on our website. And now I will bring Kassi in. Good evening, Kassi.
Hi, Terry. How are you?
I'm very good. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Thank you for the intro.
No, that's good. No, well, it was pretty much just taken from your, probably from your website, slightly changed. So you did a good job writing it.
Thank you. And thank you for all the amazing work that you do as well. It's just incredible. And especially in the connection space, we know how important connection is, especially now with all the changes and with COVID and all of that. So more of that in the community, please. And what you're doing is incredible. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Firstly, it's probably relevant to say connection. If my screen freezes tonight, my internet connection is not the best. You probably will hear the audio, so don't stress if I'm a bit slower, but bearing that in mind. Back to the real connection, however, though, I think maybe, how did we meet? Maybe on LinkedIn, maybe I sent you a message and said, you look like the 3 main things you were doing. I was like, this is almost exactly what we're all about. So being men's health, mental health, and connection. So there you go. So I was like, yeah, tick, tick, tick. And I think I reached out and said hello and said, I like what you're doing. We had a quick chat on the phone, or I say a quick chat. I could have chatted for forever. And I definitely felt we connected and we're on the same wavelength about what we are really passionate about in slightly different domains and the way we go about it. But I definitely felt that, and I had to have you on. And it just seems so apt. You are the second female we've had on TRH, but it is International Men's Day. And I was just so impressed about how you talk about, not only on your videos, but your blogs, everything else I've read about you so far, about how you talk about men and how you promote us. So first and foremost, love to hear for our audience a little bit of an intro about you, as little or as much as you like, and basically how my sort of first question was going to be how you got into what I call doctoring. So away we go.
Yeah, so I work in the medical space as a doctor in mental health. So that's mostly working in the acute mental health wards across Australia. So I move around a lot with that. I do that only part-time. The rest of my time is spent on my own endeavour, which is Blokes in Mind, which is a space where I get to wear the hat of being a men's mental health advocate, where my passion lies, and also supporting men with their relationships as a relationship coach. And as we know, sort of relationships and connection is integral to our mental well-being. So that's what I'm doing most of the time now. But yeah, I sort of a background from me, I've lived a couple of lives. So I was born in Germany. I spent many years growing up in South Africa and now recently in Australia. So that's been for about 15 years living near Brisbane. So that's my sort of very quick run through my history. But yeah, I went straight into medicine following school and very early on went into mental health, which it was very clear to me that was my passion. I was most fascinated by it. Yeah, it's funny. Always a lot of people who go into medicine get asked the question, why did you go into medicine? And for me, I loved the body. I loved everything about the biology of that. And you love helping people. And I found that very rewarding. So quite early on, I knew I wanted to do medicine. And then, when you start off in medicine, you go through all these different rotations and try different specialties out. And yeah, mental health was just the one that absolutely connected. It's relevant to everyone. Mental health is everybody's business. It's funny because we talk about it in a way where it's like, there's physical health, and then there's sort of that mental health thing that no one talks about and everyone kind of ignores, including in medicine. There's this stigma around mental health, even within medicine.
Yes.
And yet it's so relevant to all of us. And it has this incredible, investing in emotional health has the greatest return on investment for health. I think, it's your entire being, it's your entire identity. So working in that space and helping people in that space is extremely rewarding. And so that's really where I started my direction. And I've obviously come around a few corners since then.
So the couple of things you said there, I was just like, wholeheartedly agreed. Working in healthcare, not being a clinician, but working with doctors and healthcare professionals for maybe 10, 11 years now since I've been in Australia. And I was always, I guess, the system here in Australia, I thought, I did think at one point a few years ago, why is there in, say, a hospital, let's say it's a major hospital in Sydney, there's the hospital and there's all the departments, yet the mental health, physically, the department or the building or the whatever it was separate, or it was away over there on the campus. And just a tiny thing, just a thought went to my head a long time ago, never questioned it. And then it came back full circle when I was talking to some psychiatrist about it. And then in the last 5 maybe years that we've really started to understand more, and there's been more awareness around mental health and how it affects the other parts of our health. I think the system hasn't really caught up, and I don't know how it's going to catch up in the middle. I don't know how they change it overnight. It's probably going to take a generation, but that's one thing. So like spot on. I was just like nodding inside going, yeah. The other thing being my own journey currently, and you said about integral, the mental health of yourself or where you're at and your well-being mentally being integral to the other parts of your health. I've learned that over the last 6-7 years of now that I'm in a mentally good place, the other things have fallen into place. My gut health has got better. My relationships have definitely got better. All these other things have just slowly fallen. Don't get me wrong, they haven't happened overnight, but it's taken time that I've got that bit right in my mentality, and I have my bad days, but the other things fall into place as well. So yeah, I was just agreeing with everything you were saying there. So yeah.
And it's in some way or another, that is a very shared experience. And obviously, how we are affected by life, everyone's affected differently. Everyone has different ways of dealing with that. But in one way or another, we're all faced with challenges. It's so universal, and we're not really taught. It's not something that's brought into schools, or that now it's sort of changing, but we don't get taught how to deal with the mind or our mental well-being, how to make that a priority. And so we're very much still in the stage where we kind of have to figure it out on our own. There are services out there, but in terms of the educational space, there's still so much we can do. And so it's very much a self journey, I think, discovering what keeps us well, let alone what keeps, communities and populations well. And it's funny that you say that about the hospitals, because that's exactly right. And I think it adds to the stigma. There's always a separate mental health department, and it's often an older building. It's often not the most good looking building of the lot. And it's really, it's coming to a change now, but it has taken a long time, and there is still that stigma around it.
Yeah, and I think they're managed almost separately. From my experience of working with both parts, literally, no, that's not us. You go over there.
It's completely separate entity. It still is in a way, and and even the whole sphere. And this is probably why I was drawn to it. The whole sphere of mental health is really probably about 50 years behind medicine in all elements. If you think of something like trauma medicine or cardiac medicine, we've looked in all the corners. We have very clear ideas around what works, what doesn't. It is still growing, but not to the same extent. Where it's very black and white. It's right or it's wrong. It's an X-ray, it shows me this or it doesn't. Whereas with mental health, it's still a very gray area. We have ideas around sort of patterns and common things that may help, but it's certainly not black and white. And it's only now that they are putting much more money into the research around what helps our mental well-being. That's only been in the last sort of couple of years, maybe 10, 20 years. Before that, there was no money in mental health at all. And yet it's the most exciting space to be in, because the things that we're discovering is, it's phenomenal. The amount of sort of energy that's going into keeping us well, because in a way we're coming to a crisis. We're coming to this kind of peak between, we've been living a certain way, and with the Industrial Revolution and all these, the modernization and technology, and now we're going, there's a couple of consequences. We've got chronic illnesses, of course, we've got diabetes and obesity, but we've also got the mental health stuff on the rise. So it's now suddenly it's worth investing in keeping people well, because it's expensive from the community and government perspective. So then now they're like, got to put some money into that as well. So it's a really exciting space, but it's an interesting, great area.
There's work to do, I guess. The as much as we talk about this being a crisis, which it is, let's say how it is, there is opportunity in that, because the people that really go, well, everything I do can add something to this right now. And one person doesn't change the way things are approached overnight, but man, there's so much opportunity to do better.
Absolutely.
But I guess that's what I was intrigued when I was reading a little bit about you, not knowing too much about you, but so you work in that system in a sort of medical clinical sense. How do you balance that with the work and interest that you have in lifestyle medicine? Because I know from my kind of intro into this is of doctors I deal with in my day job, or I speak to lifestyle medicine as a term, as a thought process, is still a very new thing, whereas psychiatry is not. How do you balance, mix the two? Do you keep them separate? What do you do? And what is lifestyle medicine as well? Which I'd love for you to say.
Good question. So essentially, I guess if I explain a bit about my journey, it would make a bit more sense. So I was working in that clinical space as a registrar trainee for mental health for a couple of years, and realized there were things that were missing for me personally. So it is a very pharmacological based model. So very sort of medication based, which absolutely has its place. in, helping people, especially in that sense, which was very much, catching people at the rock bottom, helping people that were very unwell, and approaching it from that biological model. But as, you and I and anyone would know, mental health is a bit more complex, and it is, it invites us to think about all the other things that contribute to our mental health in a more kind of holistic, if you could call it that, way. So all these other things that we could be doing around in our environment, in our relationships, in what we do and how we are, that could also contribute to that. And there are limits to your role in the clinical space. Obviously, it's extremely time strained, and there's only a certain amount of things that you can do or even allowed to do with your patients, especially in the acute mental health wards. It's very in and out. Yes. And you're catching people at that crisis level. And I thought there's all this work in the crisis level. There's actually quite a few services now that catch people when they're at rock bottom. But what about, preventing people from hitting rock bottom in the first place? And there just really isn't that much in the preventative space. People don't go from sort of feeling well to hitting rock bottom. It's a process. And during that process, I thought, wouldn't it be much more powerful to have things and services available to stop people from hitting rock bottom or support people in the community, kind of like a softer approach. And I think something like Mr. Perfect is amazing also in that space. And we need more of that, to prevent people from hitting rock bottom. So it got me thinking, and I've always had an interest in lifestyle kinds of things. And I came across this lifestyle medicine sphere. So lifestyle medicine is essentially looking at lifestyle-based approaches that we can use to keep us well and to prevent chronic illnesses. So it's looking at things such as exercise, diet, the gut microbiome, stress, sleep, psychology, mental health, and how all of these different things can support us and prevent us from getting things like diabetes, obesity, and depression and anxiety as well. So it's basically looking at the preventative space. It's different to things like integrative medicine or alternative medicine, where lifestyle medicine is very evidence-based. So it's entirely founded in what the research is saying and what the evidence is saying. And in that way, it creates quite a good foundation. It is a new specialty. So it's sort of the Australasian Society of Lifestyle Medicine is an offshoot of the International Society of Lifestyle Medicine, which was started in the US, and it's growing. It's becoming a bigger field. I know the Australasian Society has only been around, I think, for about 5 years or so. And so most people that go and become physicians or go to the conferences are either GPs or psychiatrists, so they have their own specialty field. So looking into the future, they're hoping to get more funding and create, and it's sort of created as its own specialty so that people could just be a lifestyle medicine physician, yes. But it's a work in progress. There's so many sort of hurdles that they have to jump over to get to that point. I know they've also had trouble with funding and government funding because it's quite, I think it's challenging to make an argument from a funding perspective. Unfortunately, it does come a lot down to sort of political things and funding issues. And it's difficult to fund the preventative space because it's very difficult to measure the outcome. But it's very easy to measure, the effect of a pill on the population rather than, a sort of a diabetes education group over a number of years and how that might prevent them from getting diabetes down the track. So in that way, it has its challenges. But I obviously I'm not a GP or a psychiatrist, so I went in just as a registrar for my own interest and to really discover all the research-based things around lifestyle stuff that we can do for mental health in particular. So I went in with that sort of angle, so I came out of that thinking, wow, there's so much we could do. And then coming back into the medical space, it was frustrating actually, because there was so much more I wanted to do and so much more that I thought we could bring to the table. But again, there's limits of time and funding and all of these things. And that's really where I sort of thought, well, maybe I could look at doing something else where I can just follow my own passion, really. And rather than take the prescribed route of becoming a psychiatrist, excuse the pun, but to do something where I could start bringing that knowledge just out into the public. And I really started just writing content. I love writing. I love creative work. So I started writing content, doing videos, and underlying all of that, I've had this passion for men's mental health for a very long time. And especially seeing working with men in the mental health space, it's been really interesting. I think going in initially, I kind of thought there wouldn't be much of a difference between, quite naively, I thought, between men and women in that space, and we just look at it as mental health as a whole, and in many ways we do, but there's a difference, there's a disparity in not only in sort of the availability for men to be able to reach out for help, but also in the services that we provide. And I did notice that a lot of the things that we offer feel quite feminized in a way. We have a lot of supports for women and not that much for men. And then there's the argument, well, is there the demand? And then you go back to sort of, well, how do we start encouraging men to actually reach out and start, asking for help? And so I sat with a lot of patients and felt there's this vast sense of aloneness with a lot of the men that I worked with, in that, they felt they couldn't reach out. They'd hit rock bottom and they'd sit with me or the doctors or the whole system, and they felt sort of at a loss as to where to turn. And there was a very different feel to that than with women. And it was something that's always struck me. And I've had a lot of male friends growing up, and I've had friends and family who struggled as well. And it was just very obvious to me that there are pressures on men that are different to women, especially now. And so I felt this want to help, essentially to help men in this space where not many people were really talking about it. It was sort of swept under the rug a lot. I just felt that was, there's this huge need. They're very underrepresented. I think, if you look at psychology clinics, I think, 70 to 80% are females. And when you look at the diagnoses of depression and anxiety, females, it's much higher in females than in males. But then when we look at things like the suicide rate, it tells us otherwise. And I think really what's happening is it's underrepresented. It's just not really talked about. So it's absolutely a space that we need to be looking at and focusing on. So I know I'm going around a bit here.
No. There's so much in there. I'm like trying to remember all the great stuff you said. And I was thinking the first point you made about the system, which I won't go on too much about, but being that you probably, when you went, I don't know, bright-eyed, like thinking, I've got all these ideas and plans, but they just don't fit into that system of, well, you're not in the label of a GP, so therefore you can't quite do this. You're not a psychiatrist, therefore you can't do this. Yes. That's just, it's not ready for that yet. Maybe it's changing a little bit, but the physical system is not ready for that. Hence why you have to start your own. The other point about men-specific services, this conversation is almost a weekly thing for me now, and it keeps coming up. How I had psychologists tell me, and doctors as well, and psychiatry registrars, trainees, in their training, they looked back to it and they went, there was never once a discussion about how we might approach a different scenario. It was just like, here's the system, here's what this condition is, here is how you do it. Bam, close the textbook, like away we go. And it's only now it's become more of a conscious awakening of what we're all going through and what we're going through differently. That's just, that is where that excites me in one sense, because it says there's so many years more now to do of work to say, how do we now make this more specific? It's not saying the problems are worse, they're just different, and the way they need to be approached are obviously different. There's a lot of work to be done. So that obviously leads into the work I think I mentioned briefly that you're doing with Blokes in Mind. So I'd love to know a little bit about Blokes in Mind, what you're doing with that, and what you've learned about connection from your work probably some from your clinical work, you've definitely learned about connection, probably not as much as you wanted to delve into, I guess, the way it works, but how much you've learned about connection in men from Blokes in Mind as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think with Blokes in Mind, essentially, I just started with writing content on Instagram and putting out free content about men and men's mental health, and the response I got was phenomenal and extremely humbling. The number of people that reached out sort of out of nowhere, almost saying, oh my goodness, no one's talking about this. I really resonate with that. And so I thought, okay, this is a space that obviously is something that we could explore and would be very worth exploring, given, the need and obviously the lack of conversation around it. And that's sort of how it grew. So I started doing that more and more. And from there, I had a lot of people really reaching out, men in particular, around relational issues. And I've always sort of know that the quality of our relationships really does determine, in a way, the quality of our life. And it's very integral part of how we function in our identity and who we are and how we feel. But again, in the medical space, I never really thought about it much. We touch on it in ways in mental health, but not very prominently. So I would have these discussions with these men around these relational issues. And I thought, well, this is definitely a space where I could help men in that way and provide that service that maybe isn't there so much. And a lot of the stuff was kind of around, men would have these issues and would feel that they couldn't talk to anybody about it. And I'd sit with, I sit with clients now, and they'd tell me something and say, I haven't told a single person about this. And it wasn't even, to me, I was like, oh, it's a very real thing that you're experiencing, and you haven't felt that you were able to talk about that to, family or friends. Whereas in, maybe in the medical space, I'd sit with a woman who might the same, I haven't told a single person about this. And what she means is, she's told her best friend, her mum and, her sister, but she hasn't told the bigger circle.
Yeah.
And so that was, something that was very overt to me. And the other thing was, a lot of the men would reach out and say, oh my goodness, I thought I was the only one. I thought I was alone in this. And it was this shared sense of relief, I think, for a lot of them to be like, oh, I'm not the only one, just because I was writing about it. But also, within the blogs, within the comments, you get these little micro communities of other men being like, I resonate with that. Oh my God, this is my story. And, and someone else will come in. And so it creates these discussions and these conversations that I think a lot of men are not sort of used to, it's not discussions they're having at home or things that are really talked about. So it's really about having those conversations, connections in a way. And even if it's in that, that sort of internet ether space, it's still forms of connection. And so from that, I thought I would combine that with sort of my lifestyle medicine knowledge and my clinical knowledge, and go on to do relationship coaching to sort of upskill and help men in that space. And that's what I've been doing now, really, where a lot of my work in Blokes in Mind is, on the one hand, a lot of it's sort of free content and helping men, providing that information, and then the other part of it is relationship coaching, and a lot of it's through. So it's interesting with women. Women are very encouraged to connect on vulnerability and emotions, and it's provides an easy platform for deeper connections. And men are perhaps not passed along the same kind of model, and so for men to connect, sometimes it takes a bridge. Sometimes it takes a little more work, and so whereas if someone sort of sat back and said, oh, come to me with all your problems, that's intimidating. For anyone, it would be intimidating. But if you can connect on particular points, particular issues that are easier to talk about, and use that as a bridge to connect and to maybe delve into deeper issues, that can be really powerful. And I think that's particularly powerful with men. And so a lot of them would come to me after a breakup, breakup is it's a big life event. It's very normalized in our societies. You'll get over it, you have a few beers and forget about it. And and the expected time frame of moving on from these things is really shortened. And we just don't talk about it. We definitely don't seem to support men through these things. Men are often villainized very much in these situations, and they feel they can't, they're suddenly sort of left to their own devices. And so a lot of them have reached out, and that seems to be this bridge of creating sort of a deeper insight into, their relational world, how they process things. And in the end of the day, turning the spotlight back on them in a very subtle way, and starting to create those insights and ask those questions that perhaps they wouldn't have thought about asking in the first place, if that makes sense. So I found it it's interesting, it's rewarding, and it can make sort of a massive changes, I think, for people. So so that's really what I've been doing in Blokes in Line, and it's a journey ongoing, but it's very humbling, really, to be able to help people in that way.
Well, it's essentially quite pioneering work, because one, you're doing it without the a professional is the word, a model that suits it, so you can't just bill Medicare and away we go and have a list of people come and see you. So you're having to do it kind of, I guess, off your own back in one sense, and pioneer a little bit. You're using definitely the benefit of some of your clinical knowledge, but connecting on that level is a whole different ball game. So I'm intrigued to know, when you connect with someone who has trouble connecting themselves, either be it with their former partner or current partner, whoever it might be, or like you said, they come and they're just, this is overwhelming. How do I tell them the problem? How am I going to confront this and connect with you? How do you teach them? It's probably case by case and a bigger answer. Walk me through kind of the basic kind of process of how you teach them to connect more after they go through a breakup, for example. Is it a long process? Is it like this, because a lot of us expect us to just go and see anyone, whether it be a GP, counsellor, surgeon, whoever it might be, and like life will just be so much better once we see them, even though we're not willing to give up too much,
Yeah. And the first thing, I think, is managing people's expectations, because there never is a quick fix. There's not even a pill is a quick fix. So it really is a process. And also, making very clear that coaching is different to something like, it's not a doctor-patient thing. It's not psychotherapy. It's not in no way giving advice. It's sort of assisting and guiding the person to come to their own insights, as though they are the expert of their own life. And so that's nice, because rather than sort of affronting them and saying, do this, do this, do this, you're sort of on their side, and you're sitting next to them and saying, well, let's ask some questions. Let's sort of go through this journey together. And there's a kind of a shoulder to shoulder togetherness to it that is maybe a little bit less confronting for some than sort of sitting in front of maybe a GP, or, obviously it varies. But so in that way, coaching is a little bit different. And it does vary from person to person. So it's interesting, actually, a lot of the men that have reached out to me are not actually necessarily in the very acute phase of the grief of a breakup, but months later. And that often comes down to this idea of I should move on. I should have moved on. Is this normal? And again, comes back to the idea that we just don't talk about it in society, and we're expected to move on very quickly, especially, I think, men in many ways are expected, just, get over it. And so they come in with this expectation of maybe something's wrong with me. I haven't moved on yet. Can you fix me? So firstly, it's saying there's absolutely nothing wrong with you. It's a very normal process to grieve, and it can take months and years, and not years, but you know what I mean? It can take a long time, and it's about learning to be patient with themselves. And a big part of that is also helping them work through the emotions. So emotions are, it's something, again, that we aren't really taught growing up, how to manage our emotions. Some of us have been taught and have had wonderful parents and teachers in that space, but a lot of us don't know how to deal with emotions. And I think we very much have learned how to avoid them. We're masters at avoiding our emotions. So we'll do all kinds of things to numb or avoid, and whether that's sort of, food, booze, overworking, there's a million different ways that we can do that. And one of the ways is also just not feeling. It's just blocking those feelings. And especially with men, I suppose, are very encouraged perhaps not to show as much emotion as a woman might, in terms of grief and sadness and that kind of thing. So the problem with that is when we don't express our emotions, when we don't move through those emotions, we suppress them, we can't actually move through the grief. It actually freezes us in that process, and it heightens our stress response, and we can get kind of stuck. And often things like, we get those negative ruminating thoughts, and we can get stuck in certain places. So when we don't feel and express our emotions, we can't move through that grief. So one of the sort of more common themes is being there, providing that unconditional regard, and allowing men to actually feel those emotions and not necessarily just run or tick the box and move through that grief. And working through difficult breakups is also, it's funny because, we all create these perceptions in our mind about our world and who we are relative to other people and our relationships. And when we go through a grief, and whether it's a rejection or a loss or any kind of grief, or when we're depressed, for example, we see life through a very different window. I often tell people, you're maybe not the best person to talk about you right now, because you're viewing it through a very specific viewpoint that might not necessarily represent sort of a broader, more real representation of things. And one of those things with breakups in particular is we tend to turn on ourselves. And we tend to say, it was my fault. What did I do wrong? Why wasn't I good enough? And so a lot of the sort of narratives that we create in our minds aren't necessarily representative of what truly happened. And so reframing those thoughts is really powerful, and helping them come to sort of a healthier insight about what happened, just running through all of that. The biggest thing really is that most of these guys come to me and they haven't really been able to speak through these things. It's very, we require other people to self-modulate. And I think, back in ancient times, we'd sit in these tribes and we'd talk to, the woman would have their tribe of women, and they'd do their thing, and they'd speak to other women, and they'd work through problems, and men would do the same. They'd go on their hunting, and so we'd talk to each other a lot more. Now it's very individual. We live very individual lives, and particularly men maybe don't interact in that space of talking through problems. But talking to somebody about the things that I struggle with, about my emotions or vulnerabilities, helps me modulate my own thoughts. Yeah. So if I stick to my own kind of thoughts and say, for example, I have this idea that I'm a failure, and that thought grows in my mind, I'm ruminating on it. And if I don't talk it through with anyone, it can easily grow. You can imagine how that kind of idea can just go round and round, and we look around us in our world and we pick up cues that prove our own hypothesis. And then I go and sit with someone, I go to talk to someone, and I say, actually, I kind of think I'm a failure. And it's, it's a friend of mine, and says, oh, don't be ridiculous. That's, that's not true. And look at all these things that you've done. And I get to go, oh, okay, maybe I'm not such a failure that I think. So we actually use each other for our own social programming. So when we hang on to, difficulties, and if it's a relational issue, any kind of problem, if we hang on to them, they can sort of get bigger in our minds. So even just getting those things off our chest and talking them through, like with a sounding board or something like that, that really, really helps. And it helps self-modulate and reduces the stress response, our threat response in our mind as well.
And I think that comes back to connection to like self as well, because only now, like literally now, 30, almost 37 years old, am I going, like I know myself a lot better. I don't know myself as well as I could, but I know myself so much better now that when those things do happen, which they inevitably happen for everyone, whether you have the self-doubt or the, I don't know what's around the corner, whether it's a tragic event, whether it's something, you see it through a slightly different lens. So knowing how I may react beforehand now, and knowing the ways to see myself in a better light and be kinder and not compare myself and express it the way I do to whoever I may do it. To my psychologist, who's amazing, and he is very I can say anything to him and he's like, Terry, I've heard it all. I've literally heard it all. You think so? You tell me you think you're evil. He said, you believe me, I've heard it all. I was like, okay, that's giving me a bit of, But I used to have to wait for that recognition from him. So it was every 2-3 months, or sometimes more often, sometimes not. And I would build it up. So I start to go see him. Then I'd build it up. And then 3 months later, I'd unload. And eventually he said to me, this went on for a year. And he just said, we can't keep doing this because it's not about you just dumping it on your closest mate or your mate who's going to find it really awkward. He said, but until you come to terms with this and realize a lot of it is what you're telling yourself, we can't move forward. We can't get to a point where you're going to get to a fairly stable point where now we can build on those strengths and find out what works. Because he would say to me, it's really relevant as well what you just said, I would ignore all the good stuff that happened in the day. I had the best blocker on it. And he started saying to me, build up, you wake up, you got up, you got showered. That's the point. And he'd say it like that. Your youngest one got up, you changed his nappy, you got him ready, you put his clothes on. That's a point. And he would just build these things up over time. And the way that connected with me, I was like, it didn't happen overnight, but it started to build that bit of resilience or that recognition that, if there was a bad thing that happened at work or a rejection in my professional life and personal life, whatever it might be, it wasn't as weighty as it could have been, and just built that resilience over time. And the other thing you said about the breakup thing, it resonated hugely with me. I didn't know how to express emotion as a kid. I wasn't taught it. So good or bad, I was almost the same response. But then privately, when it was a bad thing, it was, I am the worst person in the world. That's exactly what I would tell myself every time behind closed doors. And did that, to my late 20s. That was damaging. But that was me. If I had a breakup with a girl at 15, 16, my first serious thing, and the rejection, it actually felt like it was the worst thing in the world. Rejected for a job when I was 17, that felt like a bus had hit me. There was no resilience there that had been built up. And it only, it's taken 6-7 years of really addressing it to get to a point where it's better. And I had a friend recently, maybe a year and a half ago. He's not the most talkative guy anyway, but always loved him. Always, when we'd see each other, always got on, always respected him. And he'd gone through a breakup. And me and my mates kind of got together and went, shit, what do we do? He'll be fine. A couple of us originally, and my headspace was, he'll be fine. He doesn't show much emotion, blah, blah. And we had to kind of pull ourselves out of that thought process to go, we have no idea what's going on in his head right now. No idea. And all of us separately made a point of reaching out, meeting up with him, doing everything we could, and just really not saying you must talk about it, but at least giving him the chance to. And eventually he opened up a little bit, and then a little bit more, and a little bit more. And it was just in his own comfortable way. And then we got comfort that, okay, this guy's all right. He's, it was horrible and it will take time, but he kind of feels now he has that support and he has options. And it's only now when I reflect on it, okay, geez, we have no idea how people react internally to these things. And if they don't have what he had, which is, guys that originally assumed, he'll be fine. We could be talking a different story right now. So, so important, the breakup thing, a lot of friends of friends and friends who, it can be a very sudden reaction to it, or it can be they don't trust themselves then, or their confidence is gone, or they assume there's something wrong because they haven't met their new, the one after 3 months.
Yeah.
So yeah, really relevant.
Yeah. And he was very lucky, to have you guys as amazing supportive mates, and many men don't necessarily have those, support structures in place. And rejection it's an interesting, I say rejection, any kind of breakups really, if it kind of comes back to our tribal or our ancient biology. I like to always think back to tribes because, our brains haven't evolved that much really since way back when, but our environments have changed profoundly. So we're kind of cursed or blessed, I guess, with this ancient biology. And, back in the day, we'd live in these social tribes. And if we were in any way ostracized from the tribe or rejected from the tribe, we would be at risk of death. Out on your own, you couldn't get yourself food, you couldn't shelter yourself or protect yourself from predators. So any kind of rejection, our brain goes, oh, I'm at risk of death, essentially. And we respond that way. Our threat response goes up, our stress response goes up, as though we are literally in a physical emergency. And that's often why after these events happen, we can't sleep, we can't eat, we feel stressed, we can't concentrate. Our brain is in this fight or flight response. And the interesting thing is, that part of our brain that is the emotive fight or flight response, the amygdala, is kind of working in contrast to the thinking or rational part of our brain. So that's the prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that can problem solve, that can rationally look at things and work things out. And so when our stress response is heightened, our rational sort of problem-solving part of our brain is dampened in some way. And often, guys will reach out and say, I can't concentrate at work. I cannot, put two and two together. And then a lot of their thought processes as well are coming from an emotional place, or coming from a stressed out place rather than from that kind of rational perspective. So it makes sense from a brain view, I guess, why that happens. It's not just, because I can't believe he can't see it for what for what it really is. It's like, no, that's how your brain is responding because you're in that kind of threat response.
And so, your connections then with the guys you work with, again, they're all going to be of a different stage, probably readiness to talk, to work on it. Are there any common themes that you leave them with? You say it's not necessarily telling them what to do, but maybe suggestions or maybe things you might say at a stage when they're ready to, like, how can they connect better, either to themselves or while you're not there, basically, to like walk them through that. Because that's the thing for me, it's like we have these, it could be coaching, could be with your GP, it could be with a counselor, could be with anyone, it could be with a mate. It sounds great when you're chatting to them for that hour, but you've still got to deal with it when you go away for the next, however long it might be. What do you suggest to them, or what's the common themes you see in between that you try and work on them with, or at least suggest to them to do?
Yeah, to feel, and it does vary person to person, but a lot of it is, once we've worked through the emotions and worked through the clarifying sort of what happened and the thought processes, a lot of it's also looking at your self-criticism. And how you've turned on yourself and your relationship to yourself, and sort of managing that, because that's a big part of it, because we do tend to turn on ourselves. And if we can work on that inner self-critic and make it a friendlier place to be, that definitely helps. So that's on the sort of relationship to the self side of things. And then, we can talk about, connections with others as well, because I think that's sort of a very common theme, that a lot of them come in and there's reasons why they've found it difficult to connect, and some of that might be, there's a few reasons why that might be. So we can, loneliness and social isolation are not the same thing. So we know we can be surrounded by people and feel lonely, or we can be completely socially isolated and actually feel okay and not feel lonely at all. So it's not necessarily that it's sort of the number of people. And that's where we see loneliness is a perception. It's a perception of feeling alone. And it's to do with a lack of a sense of belonging or a meaningful, deeper connection. So, and I resonate well with this. You can be surrounded by people and feel lonely, and you kind of think like, why is this? What is it? And loneliness is, again, it comes back to that idea of we need a tribe around us to feel safe. And when our brain realizes that we're not connected, it responds in a way that's going to encourage us to connect. So our brain is always going to be trying to put things in place to fix some kind of situation. So when we feel lonely, the part of our brain that experiences physical pain lights up. So it's actually a kind of physical pain, this loneliness. And on the contrary to that, being in connection with other people actually has a profound impact on our nervous systems. So our brain, our hormones, the neurochemicals, even our genes are doing this complex dance with people when we connect, and it helps us calm our nervous system, helps us feel safe, and it has profound effects on our health, on our longevity. I'm going on a bit of a tangent now, but it's really fascinating. People don't really realize the impact of that loneliness, for example, has on our physical health. It impacts our longevity. It impacts our risk of chronic illnesses. So, for example, it affects our cardiac health. Loneliness is as big a risk factor for our cardiac health as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. This is all, evidence-based. And when we look at things like longevity, people don't realize that this sort of loneliness and social isolation has an impact. And it's interesting because when we look at it, the way that our genes are affected on the level of how our body manages inflammation, and it actually also increases our clotting factors. And all of this, when we look at this, you think, what is the body doing? And our body's actually incredibly smart. So when you look at sort of the ancient tribal biology, if you were going to be alone and separated from the tribe, you would be more at risk of being attacked by a predator or getting, and so our body ramps up these things to ready us for, being, if you're going to be attacked by something. It helps to have your clotting factors up. So those are the things that stop you from bleeding out. It helps to have your immune system ramped up so that if you get any infections. So all of that is happening on a physical level if you're not getting your social connection. And so that's why social connection is so important. And when you look at the health and wellness industries, it's been very focused on the self-development. It's been this huge process of individualism and how do I get the best version of me to be the best. And it's personal growth, but it's not relational growth. And we look at things like diet and exercise, which of course are really, really important, but it's almost overemphasized at the expense of other things like stress and friendship, which arguably have even more profound effects on our health and our mental health as well.
And that's the irony of what you were saying there, because I'm doing this, like I get my buzz from seeing other people connect. Me personally, I'm actually comfortable not in a more, how can I put it, big social situations don't phase, like they're not for me. Like I do them, but it has to be with the people I connect with, if you see what I mean, in like a smaller group I'm fine with. But I feel comfortable in that now, knowing I just thought I was weird because I liked, my own space to do my own things at times. Yeah. Now I kind of get it. Like I've understood where I come from, what makes me comfortable and what doesn't. And I love seeing other people connect. I think it's amazing if it's right for them. And it's hard to find that balance between, because I think of friends, family, other people that I go, I'm really worried about them. Are they happy being not connected or isolated? Are they truly happy with that? Are they saying they're just happy with that? Can you force people who are introverts to like just go out there and feel connection? Probably not, but you want to do it sometimes, probably to their detriment. But it's tricky.
It is tricky, I think, and that's the other thing. So everyone's very different. So some people have sort of a bigger personal space, and they are just naturally more introverted. They enjoy their own time and space, and other people really love having a lot of other people around them. And sometimes one way of kind of observing that might be when I'm around other people, do I find it very energizing or do I find it draining? So if you're someone who finds it quite draining, then you need maybe more time on your own to sort of rest and restore, because you find your own space very restorative. But that's where it comes down to, you know, this isn't about, and I think a lot of people come in looking at connection being like, well, I don't have 1,000 bazillion friends, and, you know, I don't have this perfect big network of supportive mates necessarily. And it's not about the number. It's not about the quantity, or even necessarily having someone around all the time, or, you know, every night doing something different. It's about the quality. Quality is much, much more important when you're looking at the physiological measures and when you're looking at mental health as well. And quality is about depth. And that's where I think, you know, this conversation becomes a bit more interesting when we look at how do we create depth. And because, you know, particularly with men, perhaps there's this perception of, you know, I need to be perfect. I need to be Mr. Perfect. You know, I need to be sort of strong. I need to not show any vulnerabilities, not show any emotions, so that I might be accepted. So, and that's a little bit counterintuitive, because we might come into a conversation and say, all right, I've got this image of I am stronger, I'm more competent, and I'm going to show that. And what happens is the other person draws away, and it's confusing, because you think, well, I thought I'd be accepted, but now I feel kind of unfulfilled. And what happens is when we come into a conversation with that sort of, I need to be perfect, I need to be one up, it actually activates the inner critic in the other person. So that harms the connection in some way, because we connect on a sense of you are like me. So if I feel like you're like me and you're on my level, like you're in my tribe also, I'll connect more deeply with you. There's a commonality there. But if you come in with like, I'm super strong and I'm perfect and I don't have any worries at all, I'm not going to share my vulnerabilities because it doesn't feel safe. So humility fosters connection in some ways. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to, you know, go and pour your heart out or all your, you know, your history in a conversation, but it's coming in from a sort of a humble connecting level and saying, oh, I struggled with this a little bit today and that's all right. And, you know, just being real, just being more as much yourself as you can, and coming in with that sort of, this is a shared human thing, rather than I need to be perfect. And I'm no saint with this at all. And I think in a way we've all come from that place of, you know, I need to be sort of good enough, I think, to be able to connect. And I know even for myself, sort of growing up, I had that feeling I needed to be good enough to connect. And I felt like I wasn't connecting on that level. But when I was able to be a little bit more real, be myself and share, you know, my struggles and my vulnerabilities, suddenly there was connection there. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. And it's also about the kind of mindset we go into these connections with, because what happens when we go into these situations where perhaps we're a bit more anxious, we're a bit more stressed out, or I need to, you know, have my, you know, my arm on in a way, we have the spotlight on us. We're thinking very much, how am I going to feel? How are they going to see me? How am I going to be, you know, perceived? So we're thinking about ourselves. And so we'll go into connection being like, oh, I'm not feeling right. And, oh, I wonder what they think of me. And maybe they're going to judge me. The spotlight is entirely on ourselves. It's actually incredibly difficult to connect when you're thinking about you the whole time. And we all do this, I guess, especially if we have a harsh inner critic. Very much the spotlight's on us. And a really powerful way, or much more powerful way to connect, is when we turn the spotlight onto the relational space or the other person. So rather than thinking, how is this connection making me feel? Actually turning that around and being like, how do I want them to feel? Do I want them to feel calm or relaxed or excited? You know, how can I connect with them? How can I focus on them? It's about getting out of your own head. And because if you can connect in that space, that's not necessarily just on, you know, the spotlight's on you, that other person will sense that. They'll feel your presence a lot more, and they'll connect much more on that. And so actually I remember I was going through the psychiatry training, and I had this incredible psychiatrist give me some advice. He said, you know, to really connect, if you really want to connect with your patient and you really want to listen, you should listen until you don't exist. And I thought I was like, that's genius. I'm going to bring that into my connections in general. And I literally still do that now. Sometimes I'm like, just listen until you don't exist, and it absolutely works. You disappear into that connecting space. And the strange thing is, you're not focusing on you, but it's 1,000 times more rewarding. You feel that, however you're whatever you're projecting out, that person reflects that back, and you feel amazing at the end of the day. It's so much more powerful. And so that's sort of looking at, that fear of not being perfect, coming in with that sort of realness. It's not easy. It's not sort of a quick fix. You can't be like, I'm just going to walk in there and, share all my struggles. But it's about sort of changing your perception about, I need to be perfect to connect. Actually, the opposite is true, because we share that humanness. I think that's
absolutely.
Really important.
You literally, as I'm thinking about scenarios as you're saying that, and giving myself examples of where I'm just not in the space to do that. I haven't got the energy yet, and naturally I shut off, so I can't connect. But when I have, it's that cliche of people don't remember what you said at all. They just remember how you made them feel, or how welcome or comfortable you made them feel, and that just is classic kind of. I was like, yeah, I'm thinking about examples at work, probably with my wife, probably with my kids, like all those things. I was going, yeah, like hit the nail on the head. We know we should be doing it, but we are so sometimes in our own head, in our own worries, our own anxieties, our own stresses, thinking about shit, my phone's going to ring from work or something. It's all we are in. How can you effectively connect with people if you're in that space? Like, it's really tricky. Really tricky.
And we all do that. It's so normal, and it's just something we actually have to practice.
Absolutely.
It's and even going on friend dates it's like learning a new skill.
Yes.
Learning to reconnect in a way is something that does take practice. It's interesting. We are absolutely, and this is something else we forget, sometimes we live so in our own worlds. We could sit in our apartment and get Uber Eats delivered. We could watch Netflix. We can do all these things and literally not leave our apartments. We forget that we need people. We don't need people to survive, technically, it feels like, but to thrive, we absolutely do need connection. And I think we forget that, and just forget that the fact that we are biologically wired to connect. We have these really awesome neurons in our brain called mirror neurons. I'm not sure if you heard of them. They discovered them initially in monkeys, and these are neurons, like, they have no other role except to mirror the other person. So that's the sort of, they fire off if you're scratching your head. My mirror neurons are firing off, almost as though I'm scratching my head. So they're kind of connecting neurons. So if you bite into a lemon, I'll cringe. And if you laugh, I'll sort of laugh, and that's where the whole idea of like, I feel your pain. And we are literally mirroring the other person in our mind with these evolved neurons that are very specific to humans and monkeys. I think those are the only two that have them. And it's so interesting when you think about it, because when you look at like the media and entertainment industry, you could argue that it's entirely built on mirror neurons, because you'll watch a movie and you'll really feel like you're in that person's shoes, and you'll cry, and all of these emotions is essentially living vicariously through these characters. Any kind of characters are built of these mirror neurons. If you look at sporting events, why are they so interesting to us? Well, we feel like we're on the field. We feel like we're part of the team. And it's like, we get really emotionally involved. We're essentially playing with them in our minds. We've got sort of backseat drivers. All these different things are evolved from our mirror neurons. So we don't realize that we actually mirror people. And so now you might notice that when you're interacting with other people, you feel like some people are really positive, and you'll kind of find yourself becoming quite upbeat. And you're like, they're talking like this, and then you start mirroring, and someone else, you might be in a great mood, and you catch someone on a bad day, and they're like, mirror. They're really closed off, they're sort of down, and your whole mood, your whole tone of voice goes down. And so we really mirror people much more than we realize. And one way of, when you're connecting as well, I guess another hack is, one way to make someone feel good and feel connected is by mirroring them. So even just how their posture is, how their hands are, if they lean in, you kind of lean in, and that makes them feel good. It makes them feel connected. It's just something that happens in the mind they don't even realize. And even kind of your posture, and that makes a difference. So sitting very closed off and sort of head down or that kind of thing shows to another person that you're not really wanting to connect. And sometimes we do that if we're quite self-critical. Sometimes we do that without even realizing. If we're stressed, we hold things in our body. So we shut down. And you really want to connect, but it's very, very difficult. And the person will likely do the same. They'll kind of shut off or close off as well. And then you can't really. So when you're connecting, it's really helpful to actually notice your posture and face them and don't cross your arms. It sounds kind of, a bit odd, but it absolutely makes a difference as to whether you can connect in that way.
Well, it's only now I look back at things about physically at the barbecues when I used to talk to people, the first ones in Sydney, the first year we did Mr. Perfect, and I was like anxious as hell that I was going to have to be the social person and introduce people, but they listened to my story and I would do it in such a casual way and not deliberately. I just felt comfortable talking a little bit about the story, cooking sausages, chatting, and it made them, I saw the physical kind of reaction in them. Like they then went from shoulders down to, oh, actually, this is not that bad. I'm not as anxious or awkward as I thought it'd be. He's just mentioned, some struggle we went through, and it just became this. And again, it wasn't deliberate, but then afterwards I thought, oh yeah, actually they did have a good time. Like they would come back to me at the end and say, that was amazing, thanks so much. And they didn't say a word the whole time, but they felt like they got something from it, that we connected over something. And you mentioned also about the mirroring thing. I'm the same, like I'm very easily with, and I work on it with work stuff, or it might be even friends or whatever. You can so quickly, without knowing it, think you're doing the right thing by mirroring also the negative aspects, whether it being critical about something. I do it like all the time. Maybe my heart's not really in it, and half an hour later, I'm going, wow, that really put me off my stride for the day. Yeah. And it's not saying I'm going to ignore that person. I've got empathy for them because I know I was in that particular space, incredibly toxic, at least to myself, and negative. And now I'm not in that space. I'm probably more aware of it. I think I'm more just sensitive to it. So I do try and like take people for a walk or a coffee rather than sit and try and do something that's. And again, that's coming back to doing something where guys are in an activity where you can get them outside or doing something. I don't know, active, not closed off. That definitely has helped what we do with Mr. Perfect as well. But all of what you just said, man, I could speak for 10 hours on this. So, but otherwise we'll go on forever. But you mentioned so much good stuff there, as in just sort of suggestions and I guess advice on how to connect. Before we sort of leave you with the final one, like the golden piece of advice that you give, because I don't know how you're going to top those ones. How do people find out about Blokes in Mind or anything else that you're doing, your content, which I think would be incredibly helpful? And I mentioned at the start, you've had 2 blogs up on our Mr. Perfect site already today. When I sent one to someone to read, they went, wow, this is excellent. Like they replied back, I said, hey, good. I thought it was as well. How do people find out more about you, what you're doing, read about you?
Yeah, so probably my major space would be on Instagram, just at Blokes in Mind. I also have a website, just blokesinmind.com. And I do have also a YouTube channel, just slowly growing, Blokes in Mind as well. So those would be the major areas, and reach out anytime. I'm super friendly. So if you want to send me a message too, that's totally fine. Yeah, that would be the major areas.
Love it. And I feel like we've really like scratched the surface with this stuff. There's so
I
much.
can keep going.
100%. We'll have you back on very soon. We'll give it a few weeks, but I'd love to get you back on to kind of delve deeper on maybe some of those topics. I feel like some of that advice, we're kind of scared as guys that we'll just be told, oh, you must do this, rather than how about you try? Here's some ways that you might be able to connect a little bit better and try these things out. Because I think we're kind of subconsciously aware these things will work and would help. But it's just the way it's communicated in the current format guys get it is probably not the greatest way. So I'd love to go deeper next time, but thank you so much. Absolutely incredible. Yeah, so I don't know if you could top what you just said. What would your final thoughts be to our audience on connection?
Yeah, it's challenging, and you know, often we think connection is kind of like, okay, just go out and make a whole bunch of new friends. Like, all right, you know, we all know that's really hard, especially in this day and age. So there's kind of two little things, I guess I could say, which might just help, which I've seen sort of has resonated with a lot of the people that I've worked with. The first thing is that a lot of men feel that when they come across issues or sort of just life in general, they feel this need to, I should handle this all on my own because I'm strong and independent, and I should just handle this all on my own. And the whole idea is, you know, I'll get people in who say, you know, I've had this issue, and I say, well, has anyone reached out to support you in this? And they go, oh, well, actually, yeah, you know, my mate offered their support and their help. And I said, oh, how did that go? And they said, oh, I didn't want to burden them with it. And the idea of that is that connection, deep connection, requires a sense of interdependence. And that is this sense that if you offer your help to me, I'll accept it, and I will also be able to offer my help to you. If you've got my back, I've got yours. That does something profound to our nervous system, my nervous system, and the person offering the help. And it provides a point of deeper connection. Dependence, healthy dependence, is actually integral to deeper connections. So when you get, you know, offered these generous offers of help, even if it's like, hey, you know, do you want to borrow my tools? Do you want to lift to the airport? That can be the smallest of things, rather than feeling, you know, that you don't want to be a burden, or that, you know, that you don't want to intrude on somebody else. Actually willingly take that offer on, because you're doing yourself a favor and your mate a favor, and you're actually deepening that connection. So that's something that I think is quite a profound way of improving a connection that isn't too difficult. And it's sort of, you know, just accept that help, because it's a really interesting way of deepening a connection with somebody. And the other thing, I know it's two pieces of advice. The other thing that I think is also really important, and particularly maybe with the COVID times where connection isn't so easy, is that we underestimate the power of small connections. So we call them micro moments of connectivity, which are small but authentic interactions with others, and usually strangers. So it's literally, you know, a wink at someone, a little smile, you know, a laugh at the coffee barista. And micro moments of connectivity have very significant effects on our mental health, on our longevity, and even on our heart health. So heart rate variability, which is a measure of heart rate. So all of these measures improve simply with these micro moments of connectivity. So if you're not connecting, you know, and maybe you don't have your mates around, maybe it's tricky with COVID, but you're heading down to the coffee shop every day, just being cognizant and intentional with the little moments of connection. Often we're so stuck in our phones, it's almost like the world around us is like a video game or something. It's not really real. But if we can connect in the smallest of ways, it makes a profound difference to feelings of loneliness and isolation. So those are just two little hot tips to improve connection.
Amazing. I'll be doing that in the coffee shop tomorrow morning. I'm going to put my phone away. But thank you so much, Kassi. As I said, we will definitely go deeper on all of this at another time, but I'll share the links to your website and everything else, and to Instagram, to our followers. Thank you again for your time. I know it's getting late. Yeah, we will chat soon. And yeah, thank you everyone for watching. Thank you so much, Kassi.
Thank you, Terry. Appreciate it.
Take care. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.